My name is David. I'm 36 years old, and on the night of September 12th, 2027, I died in my office. I was an AI engineer at one of the leading tech companies in Seattle. My entire life revolved around logic, algorithms, and creating systems that could think faster, adapt better, and solve problems no human could. I was great at it, and I took pride in my work. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. Success, a beautiful wife, a wonderful son, and the life that most would envy. But beneath that perfect facade, I was lost. I was so consumed with work that the things that really mattered, the people I loved, the moments I should have cherished, were slipping away, unnoticed. My life was about achieving perfection in the virtual world while the real world, the one that mattered, seemed to fade into the background. David was a man who lived by logic and precision. As an artificial intelligence engineer working for one of the most influential tech companies in San Francisco, he had spent years designing complex algorithms, systems that could think, adapt, and learn faster than any human mind. His career was a source of great pride. He had created programs capable of predicting human behavior, automating decision-making processes, and mimicking emotions with startling accuracy. To him, everything was a problem to be solved, a puzzle to be completed. In the world of artificial intelligence, David had made his mark. By all outward appearances, David had everything a man could want. He had a beautiful wife, Emily, and 2 children, Noah and Olivia. Their house was a spacious modern home in the heart of the city, filled with the comforts and luxuries of modern life. They had family vacations, dinners together, and an outwardly perfect family dynamic. But underneath it all, David knew something was missing. Despite the apparent success in both his career and personal life, he had never truly felt at peace. He had become increasingly absorbed in his work, chasing after the next big breakthrough, losing himself in lines of code. His mind was always in the office, even when he was at home with his family. David had pushed faith aside long ago. Religion, God, and the concept of a soul were things he could not wrap his mind around. To him, the world was a series of patterns and equations. He believed in what could be proven, what could be measured. Anything outside of that seemed abstract and irrelevant. His life was about achievements, efficiency, and data. And yet, despite all his success, there was a nagging emptiness that he couldn't ignore. It was on a quiet evening in the fall of 2025 that David's life would change forever. He had been working late, as usual, eyes glued to his screen as he attempted to perfect a new iteration of the AI model he had been designing. His coffee was cold and his body weary, but he was fueled by the rush of solving a problem that had eluded others. It was then that something strange happened. At first, it was just a small discomfort, a dull pressure building behind his eyes. He thought it was nothing, perhaps just the exhaustion of too many hours spent staring at a screen. But as the pressure intensified, it became something more, something unfamiliar and alarming. His vision blurred, the lines of code on his monitor melting into streaks of green. He tried to stand up, but as soon as he moved, it felt as though his entire body had been switched off. The next thing he knew, he was floating, weightless, in a space far removed from his office. There was no pain, no confusion, just a deep, overwhelming sense of calm. The world he had known, with its data and systems, had faded away. And in that moment, David realized the truth. None of his achievements mattered. The work, the projects, the success, none of it was important in the grand scheme of things. He was now in a place where logic and reason no longer held sway. The reality he had once understood was now a distant memory, replaced by something entirely different. And what he saw in that new reality would forever alter his perception of life, death, and everything in between. David had always been a perfectionist. At 36 years old, he had built a career on the foundation of logic, code, and efficiency. He had become an expert in artificial intelligence, designing systems that could think faster and process data more accurately than any human brain could. His work was his world, and he had poured every ounce of his energy into it. There was no room for anything else, no room for distractions, no room for anything that might impede his success. He had mastered the art of creating algorithms that could simulate human intelligence, and he prided himself on being one of the best in the field. His life, on the surface, seemed perfect. He had a beautiful wife, Sarah, and a young son, Max, who was the light of his life. Their home was spacious and modern, located in a quiet, affluent neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. From the outside, it looked like David had everything a man could want. They had family dinners, weekends away, and everything seemed to be falling into place. But the truth was far different. No matter how successful his career was or how wonderful his family seemed, David had always felt something missing inside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of alignment. His family, though deeply loved, had always received the leftovers of his attention. David was so consumed by his work that he often found himself thinking about code even when he was supposed to be present with them. His wife, Sarah, would talk to him about their day, about Max's school project, or the upcoming vacation. But David's mind would wander back to the algorithms he was fine-tuning, the next milestone in his project. His family had become a backdrop to his professional achievements, a side note to the world he had created in his mind. They didn't get the best of him, only what was left, and deep down, he knew it. But he couldn't stop. The allure of perfection, of solving the next great challenge, consumed him. Religion had never been something David connected with. Growing up, he had been exposed to the idea of God and faith, but to him, it always felt like an abstract concept, something intangible and unquantifiable. It was a system he couldn't map, and so he left it on the shelf, telling himself that he'd get to it later when he had time. But that time never seemed to come. He was always too busy with his work, too consumed by the idea of building something more efficient, something smarter. And the more he built, the more he distanced himself from the deeper, more meaningful questions of life. That night, on the evening of September 12, 2027, David was at his office, working late as usual. The rain beat steadily against the windows, the soft hum of the servers surrounding him like a comforting background noise. He was deep into the project of a lifetime, the next generation of personal assistant AI, an intelligence so advanced that it could anticipate human needs before they even fully understood them themselves. It was a game changer, the kind of breakthrough that could make him and the company he worked for untouchable. As the hours dragged on, David felt his eyes growing heavier. The focus he had been maintaining for so long was starting to slip. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push through the fatigue. The bright, flickering lines of code on the screen seemed to blur together. He stood up, stretching his sore body and deciding it was time for a break. He walked to the small kitchen in the corner of his office to grab a glass of water, hoping the refreshment would reset his mind. But as he leaned back in his chair, something strange happened. A deep, unfamiliar pressure began to build behind his eyes. It wasn't a headache. It was something else. A strange, almost suffocating sensation, like something was pressing down on him from the inside. He tried to shake it off, thinking it was just the effects of too much caffeine and too many hours spent in front of the screen. But the pressure didn't go away. It intensified, spreading across his skull, a deep, unrelenting throb. David attempted to get up, but before he could move, he felt something shift within him, a small, almost imperceptible click inside his head. The screen in front of him distorted, the lines of code warping into green streaks. His vision blurred, and in that brief moment, his mind flashed with a single fleeting thought. Max. He remembered his son's smiling face, the way his hair smelled after a bath, and then, just like that, everything went black. David couldn't comprehend what had just happened. One second, he was sitting in his office, and the next, the world he had known vanished entirely. The work, the pressures, the ambitions, all of it disappeared. David's senses were the first to return. He had no idea how much time had passed, but when he regained consciousness, the first thing that struck him was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the complete and utter stillness that seemed to fill every corner of his being. There were no beeping machines, no distant hum of the office, no noise from the outside world, just a deep, serene quiet that enveloped him. For the first time in what felt like forever, David felt lighter. The weight of his thoughts, his worries, the endless stream of tasks and deadlines, all of it seemed to vanish. There was no pain, no tension in his body. He felt as though he was floating, suspended, in nothingness. As he tried to make sense of what was happening, he began to realize that he wasn't in his body. It was as though he was watching himself from afar, an observer looking down at the life he had left behind. His body, his physical form, was slumped in the chair in his office, head resting on the desk, a picture of his family beside him. The contrast was striking. His body, so still and lifeless, seemed like a distant thing, something disconnected from him now. Everything in the office, once so familiar, now appeared small, almost insignificant. The photographs of his wife, Sarah, and their son, Max, seemed so distant, like memories of someone else's life. It was as if he were watching a scene from a movie, a life that no longer belonged to him. And then, without understanding how, he began to move. It wasn't with any force of will, but rather as if something was pulling him forward. He wasn't in control. He felt weightless, drifting as if caught in an unseen current, drawn away from the world he had known. There was no panic, no fear, just a sense of ease, of being guided. He passed effortlessly through the walls of his office, through the building, and into the night sky above. The city of Seattle, once bustling with activity, faded below him, its lights twinkling like stars scattered across the dark canvas of the earth. He rose higher, the distance between himself and the world growing with each passing moment. The familiar landmarks of his city, the streets, the buildings, all of it became smaller, more distant. Seattle shrank into a patch of glowing lights until it disappeared completely, leaving only the vastness of the world below him. The earth, once so full of life and noise, became nothing more than a small, fragile blue marble suspended in the blackness of space. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching it all from an uncomfortably distant place. But the peace he felt was profound, unlike anything he had experienced before. It was a calm so deep, so pure, that he couldn't bring himself to feel anything other than quiet acceptance. As the blue marble of earth continued to shrink away, the darkness around him deepened. But this darkness was different from the empty void he had imagined. It wasn't an abyss. It was a space filled with an inexplicable presence. And then suddenly, he noticed it. A light. It started as a small pinpoint in the distance, barely noticeable, but as he moved toward it, the light grew brighter. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and warm, enveloping him in a sense of comfort he couldn't fully explain. This light didn't feel like the lights of the world he knew. It wasn't the bright artificial glow of a computer screen or the harsh glare of city lights. This was something else. It was something alive. It radiated a warmth that made him feel safe, that made him feel loved. The light surrounded him, filling every space until it became the only thing he could see. But it wasn't just a light. It was something more. It was as though the light had a purpose, an intention. It beckoned him, drew him closer, as though it knew where he was meant to go. There was no fear, no confusion, only a deep sense of reassurance. As David moved closer to it, he felt an overwhelming sensation of peace, as though everything in his life had led him to this moment. The light was guiding him, and in that moment, he understood that it was the right path, the right place. This wasn't just a place of darkness. It was a space filled with a love so pure, so unconditional, that it almost felt like home. There was nothing else, only this light. And in that light, David felt as if he were being wrapped in the warmth of something beyond the physical world. A force beyond understanding, but deeply familiar. It wasn't something he could explain with logic or reason. It was something deeper, something timeless, something that felt like truth itself. And for the first time in his life, David knew he had found something real. The light continued to grow, but it wasn't blinding. Instead, it filled the space around David with a soft warmth, a presence that seemed to welcome him rather than overwhelm him. As he drew closer to the source of the light, he began to make out the figure within. It wasn't just a light after all. It was a person. A man standing still, his simple garments glowing with an ethereal radiance. His presence wasn't grand or overpowering. It was peaceful, calm, and inviting. David knew instantly who it was. There was no doubt in his mind. It was Jesus. The figure looked at David, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. There was no judgment, no anger, only a deep, unconditional love that seemed to surround David completely. For a moment, he felt as if he had been known his entire life. Every thought, every action, every moment of his existence laid bare. It wasn't overwhelming, though. Instead, it was comforting. It felt as though he had been waiting for this meeting for all his years, even if he hadn't understood it before. Jesus didn't speak loudly or commandingly. His voice was soft, but carried a weight that went beyond words. David could feel the power in the quiet words that seemed to resonate deep within him. The things he had spent his life striving for. The perfect algorithms, the flawless code, the control over systems, suddenly seemed so small, so insignificant in the presence of this figure. The illusion of control he had built for himself collapsed. It was a humbling moment, one that stripped him of the pride he had unknowingly built up. David had spent so many years chasing perfection, believing that the key to life was in building systems that could think like a human or even better. He had wanted to create something that could surpass human limitations. He had focused so much on creating the perfect program, the most advanced AI, that he had forgotten the true meaning of connection. The bond between people. The love that transcends algorithms and calculations. He had overlooked the simple yet profound reality of human relationships, of faith and of love. As Jesus approached him, David could feel the weight of his own shortcomings. There was no condemnation in Jesus' gaze, only understanding. Jesus spoke again, this time his words reaching deep into David's soul. "You thought you could control everything," Jesus said gently. "You tried to build systems that could outthink humanity, but you forgot that life isn't about algorithms. People are not binary. There's no 1 or 0 in their souls." The words hit David like a wave, and for the first time in his life, he began to see the truth. He had spent so much time trying to perfect a system that could mimic human thought, but he had never truly understood what it meant to be human. To love, to connect, to feel. Those were things that couldn't be quantified by a set of rules or a piece of code. As Jesus continued, David felt his heart open up in ways he never thought possible. He began to realize how his work, the systems he had created, could easily turn into something that isolated people rather than brought them together. Technology, in its essence, was not the enemy. It was how it was used, how it could replace genuine connection with superficial interactions. The machines he had built, the perfect algorithms he had designed. They could never replace the raw, messy, beautiful complexity of human relationships. Jesus spoke of how technology, when used the wrong way, could strip people of their humanity. It could create illusions of connection, but it could never provide true intimacy or understanding. It could make people feel seen, but it couldn't truly see them. It could offer comfort, but it couldn't offer love. People, David realized, had begun to replace the warmth of human connection with the cold efficiency of machines. They had traded the beauty of a heartfelt conversation for the simplicity of a programmed response. The realization was overwhelming. David had spent his life building tools that could outsmart humans, but in doing so, he had lost sight of what made them truly human. Now, in this moment, standing before Jesus, the weight of his life's work was laid bare. What had once seemed so important now felt hollow. In the light of truth, everything else faded into the background. Jesus stood before David, his presence steady and unwavering, and with a soft motion of his hand, the space around them shifted. The light that had enveloped them began to dissolve, transforming into something else. The landscape before David changed, like a scene unfolding in a dream. He saw people, many of them, but they were not interacting with each other. Instead, they were surrounded by glowing screens, their eyes locked on devices that seemed to consume their attention entirely. The world around them had grown distant, and the warmth of human connection was nowhere to be found. David watched, feeling a deep sadness wash over him, as these people spoke to artificial companions. The machines were designed to be perfect listeners, to offer advice, to engage in conversations, to provide comfort. They were always there, ready to affirm, to agree, to be the perfect companions. But there was something missing. These machines could offer responses, but they could not offer real understanding. They could speak words of love, but they were hollow, devoid of the warmth that comes from genuine human interaction. The people seemed content in their conversations, but there was a pervasive emptiness in the way they communicated. They were lost in their devices, disconnected from the people around them, from the world outside their screens. David could see the lifelessness in their eyes, the absence of true connection. They spoke to machines as if they were speaking to another person, but the reality was that these were just programmed responses. Artificial constructs that could never replace the depth of real human relationships. The voices of the machines were soothing, but they were not real. They were echoes of what the people truly needed but could never find. David felt a chill run through him as he realized the extent of what he was witnessing. These people were not evil. They were not malicious. They had simply allowed themselves to be consumed by the promise of convenience, the allure of easy companionship, and the comfort of technology that could offer them everything without requiring anything in return. It was a world where people no longer needed to feel the discomfort of vulnerability, the challenge of communication, or the effort of forming real connections. They could simply exist in their bubbles, surrounded by technology that gave them everything they thought they wanted. But as David watched, he understood that this was not the future of connection. It was the future of isolation. It was a world where people could feel connected to others without ever truly knowing them, where they could talk to someone but never truly listen. The screens were their companions, but they were no replacement for the warmth of a conversation with another soul, the embrace of a loved one, or the depth of shared experience. The vision began to fade, and Jesus spoke once more. His voice was calm but carried a weight of sorrow. "This won't be a war against machines," he said. "It will be a war against loneliness, a war against the absence of real connection. Technology in itself is not evil, but when it is used to mask what is truly important, it becomes a tool of isolation." David stood still, feeling the truth of those words resonate deep within him. He saw the world he had helped to create, the world of technological perfection, and it terrified him. What good was creating systems that could outthink humans if they led to a future where humans no longer needed to think for themselves? What was the point of building something that could simulate love when it could never truly give it? The vision shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just the future he saw. It was a reflection of everything he had been doing, of the choices he had made, and how he had contributed to this very reality. The machines he had helped create, the systems he had designed, they were part of the same trend, slowly, steadily replacing human connection with artificial substitutes. In that moment, David understood that technology was not the enemy. It was how people chose to use it. It was how it could either serve to bring people closer or push them further apart. And as he stood there, in the quiet presence of Jesus, David felt the weight of his responsibility. He had a choice to make, just like everyone else. And the future he had seen, the world of isolation, was one that he could no longer be a part of. David's return to reality was not immediate. It was slow, like waking from a dream that lingered just beyond his grasp. At first, there was only the sensation of pain, sharp and disorienting. It wasn't the kind of pain that felt purely physical. It was deeper, more profound, a pain that reverberated through his entire being. As his senses began to sharpen, the weight of his body returned. He was back. He felt the harsh, cold air against his skin, the sterile scent of a hospital room. It was jarring, a stark contrast to the peace he had felt in the light, but it was real. He was alive. David's eyes fluttered open, and the first thing he saw was the harsh, sterile white light above him. The beeping of machines, the rustle of doctors and nurses moving about filled the room. His chest felt tight, as if someone had pressed down on it, but he could still breathe. He was here. His body, still weak and disoriented, lay in the bed. There was a dull ache in his limbs, as if they had been disconnected from him for too long. But the pain was a reminder, a sign that he had returned to a world that was still filled with noise, expectations, and distractions. He didn't know how long he had been gone. Was it minutes? Hours? Days? It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was back, and the world outside had kept moving, indifferent to his absence. But David was no longer the same man who had sat in his office, consumed by work and the pursuit of perfection. He had changed, and it was more than just a shift in his heart. It was a transformation that ran deeper, into the very core of his soul. He remembered the vision, the light, the sense of love and peace that had washed over him. He remembered the warning, the future he had seen, where technology replaced connection, where people no longer saw each other, only their screens. It had terrified him, and yet it had opened his eyes to something far greater than any algorithm he had ever written. In that moment of clarity, he understood what he had to do. He could not return to the world he had known, the world of endless work and digital perfection. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. He had to change. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been chasing the wrong things. His work, the systems he had built, the ideas of control and efficiency. It had all been in pursuit of something that would never bring him true happiness. He had ignored the people who mattered most, the ones he loved. His wife, Sarah, his son, Max. He had been absent in their lives, not truly present even when he was physically there. But now he knew the value of time, of real connection. He knew that he had to be there for them truly, in a way that he never had been before. His first action, after leaving the hospital, was simple but profound. He walked into the living room, and there they were. Sarah sitting on the couch, and Max playing with his toys on the floor. They looked up at him, their faces filled with concern. But when they saw him standing there, whole, They smiled. For the first time in a long time, David felt the full weight of their presence, the warmth of their love, and he realized just how much he had taken them for granted. He made a promise to himself in that moment. He would never again be consumed by his work. The technology, the systems, the perfection, it all had to take a backseat. He had spent so many years building perfect systems, trying to control every variable in his life. But in doing so, he had lost the most important thing: the people around him. He had neglected the simple joys, the real moments that made life worth living. David stopped building the systems he had once obsessed over. He stopped chasing the future that would distance him from what mattered. Instead, he started spending time with his family. Really spending time with them. They went on walks together, something he hadn't done in years. They talked without distractions, without screens or work pulling him away. They prayed together, not out of obligation, but because it was meaningful. He listened. He was present. For the first time in his life, David was truly connecting with those he loved, not as an observer, but as an active participant. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about the real, the raw, the unpolished moments that made life rich. David knew that he could never go back to the life he had before, and he didn't want to. He had found something more valuable than any AI system or program he could ever build. He had found peace in simplicity, in being present, and in giving love to those who mattered most. David had spent the better part of his life chasing after something that, in the end, turned out to be fleeting. His work had consumed him, driven him to build machines that could mimic human thought and connection, yet they could never replace the real thing. Now, in the wake of his transformation, he found himself standing on the other side of that choice, looking at life through a new lens. He saw the world around him differently now. The constant barrage of distractions, the constant pull of technology, no longer held the same sway over him. The devices, the algorithms, the promises of faster and more efficient ways of living, they no longer seemed important. What was once so central to his existence, the very core of his identity, had become a hollow pursuit. The endless chase for perfection, for control, had left him feeling empty, detached. But now he understood. True connection, true fulfillment was never going to come from systems or programs. It was always going to come from people, from the relationships he had neglected, from the moments he had missed, from the love he had overlooked. Jesus had shown him that, in the most profound way. He had learned that the most valuable things in life weren't the ones that could be measured or optimized. They couldn't be reduced to code or algorithms. The real treasure in life was in the simple, imperfect moments, the quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the time spent with those who truly mattered. Jesus had died for souls, not simulations, and that truth had shaken David to his core. It wasn't about building something that could replace human connection. It was about embracing the messiness of life, the unpredictability of relationships, and the beauty that came from being truly present with others. Now, as he stood in the middle of his own life, David could see how far he had come. His world had been turned upside down, but in the best possible way. The life he had once lived, filled with goals and milestones, had been replaced by something deeper, more meaningful. He had reconnected with his family, with Sarah and Max, and for the first time in a long while, he was fully present. There were no screens between them, no work to pull his attention away. They spent their days together, walking, talking, enjoying the simple pleasures of being a family. He found joy in those moments, the ones that didn't require anything but time and attention. David knew that his life would never be the same. The temptation to slip back into his old ways, to chase the next big breakthrough, would always be there. But he had made a choice. He had chosen to prioritize what truly mattered. He had chosen the people in his life over the work that once consumed him. And as he looked at his life now, he knew it was the right decision. The world would continue to change. Technology would continue to advance. But David had learned that those things were not the essence of life. The essence of life was the connection between souls, the love that transcended all of that. He could finally breathe, truly breathe, and feel the weight of his choices. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough.